that there will be reductions. And the reductions will have to occur. As I said to the Board of County Commissioners back at our retreat in February, our reality is a very sobering reality. Our reality is that we have a significant decline in revenue. Every one of our revenue sources, with the notable exception of property taxes, is experiencing a decline. This is the first year that I have been in Mecklenburg County, and I came here in December of 1991 and as an assistant county manager. This is the first year that we've ever put a budget together where we have not had growth revenue in sales tax growth or growth revenue in the property tax. Obviously, you know that sales tax revenues have declined. Property taxes, on the other hand, have stabilized. Let me put that in perspective for you in another way. In the current fiscal year, which ends June the 30th, we had growth revenue in excess of $20 million, and we still had to reduce $70 million last year in our budget because of the recession that we're currently in. So the current reality is one where we just don't have the revenue. We're projecting for this fiscal year, which ends June 30th, an additional $35 million gap for this fiscal year that the Board of County Commissioners is going to be required to close. And part of that is the 5% cuts that we have been talking about. It might be a little bit greater for libraries, I think 5.6%,
6.3, I think.
Whatever the number is, somewhere in that neighborhood, but to close that gap this fiscal year. In addition to that, we're asking some of the other agencies that we fund, such as Charlotte Mecklenburg Schools, to revert some funding back to us, and that's on the heels of them also receiving a reduction this past year, as did other county agencies. So we got to make up 35 for this fiscal year. The other thing that we're seeing is that for the next fiscal year, we're projecting right now a funding gap of about $85 million for next year. With the targeted reductions, I've asked departments to, and including our other partners, I've given them targeted reductions that total about $95 million. So why more than what we think that we're going to need? The problem is that we don't know how much we're going to need. We know it's going to be 84, but we thought that we'd be in a better position on sales tax. For example, this past week, we got our sales tax estimates in from December, the holiday sales. Compared to last year, we were about $5.5 million less than the same point last year. Last year, for the month of December, which is reported in February, we received $18.5 million. This year, we received 13.3. When we saw that number, we said, whoa, we're in a bigger hole than we thought we were going to be. And so we went back and adjusted our numbers for next year, and that's how we got to the 84. I need the flexibility in planning for the budget, and so that's why the numbers are as great as they are, the 95 million number. And that number will allow us to do a couple things. One is to anticipate as best as we can what the impact of the state budget cuts will be. I see Molly Griffin over there. Molly knows exactly what I am saying. The state is a wild card for us because we don't know what costs they might push on counties to cover. You know, part of that deficit for next year includes some costs that they pushed on us this year. Child support enforcement is one of them. Taking away the reimbursement for the housing of state misdemeanor prisoners in our jails is another expense. The increased costs for the county share of the pension payment that's paid on behalf of the counties can go from, the counties currently pay 4.8%. They've increased it by 1.5%. So now counties will pay 6.3%. There's about a $4 million cost. So we've got some costs increases in that deficit that we're going to have for next year. When I met with the Board of County Commissioners, I shared with them some thoughts. And one of the thoughts that I shared with the board was that this reality that we face is going to require a very different thinking about how it is that we provide services. And I'm going to read something that I read to my board in my opening comments for our strategic planning conference. And it's a quote that comes from New York Times writer and author Thomas Friedman when he penned a column in January that speaks to government leaders having to make difficult choices. And he makes a distinction between decisions based on situational values versus sustainable values. And he says leaders guided by situational values do whatever the situation will allow, regardless of the interest of the community over the long term. And people inspired by sustainable values will do the opposite, making decisions that sustain the community for future generations. And then he went on to say, and I quote, "Politics as usual will kill us. We badly need leaders inspired by sustainable values, not situational ones. Without that, we'll just be digging our hole deeper and making reckoning when it comes that much more ferocious," end quote. The brutal fact is that the current climate that we're in is not of our making, but the brutal fact is that we have some very tough choices to make going forward. Like I said, I wish I did not have to be here, but I'm going to leave you with a challenge, and that challenge is how do we respond to what I would characterize as this disruptive event? We have been very blessed in this community to have been able to have growth and to have the prosperity that we have. But I was telling somebody earlier, I got up at 3:30 this morning and went down to my computer, and I just knew in anticipation that I couldn't sleep. But I got up and I read for about 2 hours. And I just Google searched budget crisis all over this country, from the New York Times to Washington Post to blogs. And we're not in this by ourselves. And when I read what's happening in communities in Maryland, and I see what's happening in Arizona and Florida and all over this particular community, it says to me that for us to go forward, we're going to have to come up with some new models that are going to sustain us for the future. And I don't know what the right model is, but I will say that I think the Board of County Commissioners are really going to want to hear from you, what you believe the new model should entail, what the new business model should entail. Whether, when you read what other businesses are doing, my model is going to change. We're going to be, Mecklenburg County, and in my own office, is going to be a contracted organization. And we're going to have to determine ways that we can do business in a very, very different way, in a very different manner. And maybe to Charles's chagrin, I was asked a question at a dinner 2 years ago here, what I thought. And I suggested, well, maybe the time has come that we need to consider how library services are provided as opposed to continuing the traditional manner of competing for limited resources in bond referenda or COPS funding and building facilities. Maybe we need to be looking at either a combination of building and leasing, which is an operational expense, but where libraries might become anchor tenants in shopping centers. It's not to belittle the importance at all of libraries. I don't want anybody to think that because I have given a target as high as that is, that I want to belittle the importance of libraries to this community.